telling you, most people walk through life treating discipline like it's the enemy. They see it as some harsh taskmaster, a cruel force demanding they give up what they love in order to become what they're supposed to be. They grit their teeth, they brace themselves, they approach every disciplined act like they're marching into battle against their own desires. And because they see it that way, they lose most of those battles. They can't figure out why it keeps happening over and over again, no matter how hard they try. The problem isn't their willpower. The problem is the way they're looking at the whole thing. I want to offer you a completely different way of seeing this. Discipline isn't punishment. Discipline isn't restriction. Discipline isn't a war you wage against yourself. Discipline is actually the highest form of self-respect a human being can practice. It's the way you tell yourself, without ever saying a word, that you matter. It's the quiet daily way of declaring that your word means something, that your promises have weight, that your commitments to yourself are worth honoring. When you really get that, the whole experience of discipline changes. Think about the kind of relationship you'd have with a friend who constantly broke their promises to you. Picture a person in your life who said they'd meet you for dinner and just never showed up. Imagine they borrowed money from you and never paid it back. Picture them telling you they'd be there in a tough time and then disappearing when you needed them most. Would you trust that person? Would you rely on them? Would you build anything important with them? Of course you wouldn't. Over time, you'd learn to expect very little from them because they taught you through their actions that their word was worthless. Now, I want you to think about something uncomfortable, something most people never stop to consider. How often do you treat yourself the way that unreliable friend treats other people? How often do you make a promise to yourself at night about what you're going to do tomorrow, and then fail to keep it when the morning actually comes? How often do you set a goal, make a plan, commit to a new direction, and then quietly walk away from it a week later without even a serious conversation with yourself about why? Every time you do this, you're teaching yourself a lesson. You're teaching yourself that your word, when you say it to yourself, doesn't really matter. And once you believe that, you've laid the foundation for a very difficult life. Here's what I want you to understand. The relationship you have with yourself is the most important relationship you'll ever have. It's the one relationship you can't escape, can't divorce, can't walk away from. You're with yourself every moment of every day, from the time you open your eyes in the morning to the time you close them at night. The quality of that relationship determines the quality of nearly everything else in your life. When you respect yourself deeply, the world tends to respect you too. When you don't, it doesn't matter how many people tell you you're wonderful. The message just doesn't get through. Discipline is the practice of being trustworthy to yourself. When you say you're going to wake up at a certain hour, and you actually do, you've just deposited something valuable into your own account. When you say you'll finish a task, and you finish it, you've deposited again. When you say you're going to stop a habit that's hurting you, and you actually stop, the deposit is even larger. Over time, these deposits add up to something remarkable, something no amount of outside praise can ever give you. They add up to real, genuine self-respect. Not the kind you fake in the mirror, but the kind that lives quietly in your chest and lets you walk through the world with a steadiness other people can feel. Here's something subtle that happens when you start practicing discipline as self-respect. Your desires themselves start to change. The things that used to tempt you lose some of their power. You realize that giving in means betraying someone you've come to care about, and that someone is you. The late-night snack that derails your health, the angry text you almost send, the commitment you're tempted to break, all of it starts looking different through the lens of loyalty to yourself. You start asking a very different question. You start asking whether the moment of pleasure is worth the breach of trust. And more often than not, you find that it isn't. So I want you to stop thinking of discipline as something done to you and start thinking of it as something done for you, by you, on behalf of the person you are and the person you're becoming. When you set your alarm and get up on time, you're keeping a promise to someone you love. When you do the work you said you'd do, you're honoring someone who's counting on you. When you hold the line on a standard you set, you're telling yourself in the most powerful language there is, which is the language of action, that you're worth the effort. And that message, repeated day after day, year after year, becomes the foundation of a life built on the solid ground of self-respect instead of the shifting sand of self-betrayal. Here's what I've noticed. We live in a world that celebrates the visible, the dramatic, the moments that get captured in photographs and remembered in stories. We love the speech at the finish line. We love the trophy held high. We love the interview after the victory, where the successful person stands in front of the cameras and talks about what it all means. But none of those moments are where character actually gets built. Those moments are just where character gets revealed, and there's a huge difference between the two. Character is built in the quiet hours. It's built in the rooms where nobody's watching, in the mornings where nobody would ever know if you stayed in bed, in the evenings when the only witness to your effort is the ceiling above you. It's built in the moments when there's no applause available, when the camera is off, when the crowd has gone home and it's just you and the work, and a small voice asking if you'll keep going. And the answer you give in those quiet moments, repeated hundreds and thousands of times over the course of your life, becomes the truth of who you really are. Let me paint a scene for you. It's 5:30 in the morning. The house is still dark. Everyone you love is asleep. The bed is warm, the room is cold, and there's absolutely nobody on earth who would ever know if you rolled over and went back to sleep for another hour. Your alarm has gone off, and you have a choice to make. Now, the choice seems small. It seems almost unimportant. 1 hour of sleep, what does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? But I want to suggest to you that this is not a small choice at all. This is one of the most important choices you'll make that day. Not because of the hour itself, but because of who you become in the making of it. When you get up in that moment, with nobody watching and no reward waiting, you're practicing something you can't practice anywhere else. You're practicing the ability to stay faithful to your own intentions when there's no outside motivation around. You're becoming a person whose actions don't depend on an audience. And let me tell you, the person who can be disciplined alone is a person who cannot be stopped. Because the world gives us very few audiences, and the successes that matter most are almost always earned in private, long before anyone else ever sees the result. Think about the athlete who stands on the podium with a medal around their neck. Everybody sees that moment. But what they don't see is the 10,000 mornings before it, the cold gym, the empty track, the training sessions where the only sound was the athlete's own breathing. The medal is the revelation. The mornings were the building. Think about the author whose book finally shows up on the shelves. Everybody celebrates the launch. But they didn't see the hundreds of afternoons spent alone with a blank page, the times when the work was going badly and the author kept going anyway because they'd made a promise to themselves they intended to keep. This is why I tell people that the biggest enemy of character is the need for immediate recognition. When you need somebody to see you doing the right thing in order to do it, you've already handed your discipline over to forces outside your control. You've made your consistency dependent on whether someone happens to be looking. And the truth is, for most of the important work in your life, nobody will be looking. Nobody will know if you did the extra reading, the extra practice, the extra hour of preparation. Nobody will know if you held your tongue in a moment you could have lashed out, or if you chose kindness when cruelty would have gone unnoticed. The quiet hours aren't a punishment you have to endure on the way to the spotlight. The quiet hours are the actual place where your life is being shaped. The spotlight, when it comes, is just the public display of what was already built in private. And if nothing was built in private, no spotlight in the world can create the substance that isn't there. You can't fake character in the moment it gets tested. You can only reveal what's been quietly forged in the hours nobody ever saw. So I want you to develop a new respect for the moments when nobody is watching. I want you to understand that those moments are not the lesser moments of your life. They're the greater ones. They're the moments where the real decisions get made, where the real work gets done, where the real person you're becoming is being formed, one quiet choice at a time. When you stand up in the dark and do what you said you'd do with no applause and no reward, you're doing something extraordinary. You're building the kind of character the world can sense but can never fully explain. The kind that comes from keeping faith with yourself in 1,000 rooms where nobody ever knew you were there at all. I want to talk with you now about a particular kind of suffering, one that almost everybody goes through at some point in their life, and yet very few people ever put a name to it. It's the suffering that comes from knowing what you should do and refusing to do it. This is a unique kind of pain, and it doesn't look like the dramatic suffering we see in movies. It doesn't announce itself with some big crisis or one terrible event. Instead, it lives underneath the surface of an ordinary life, a low hum of dissatisfaction that follows a person from morning to night, year after year, whispering a question they don't want to answer. The question is simple. Why aren't you doing the thing you know you should be doing? And the pain that comes from not answering that question is in a lot of ways worse than the pain of almost any difficulty you could face. Because outside hardships, as painful as they can be, at least come with a sense of direction. You know what to do when a storm hits. You batten down the hatches, you weather it, you rebuild. But the pain of wanting without doing has no storm to weather. It just stays. It becomes part of the furniture of your life, and you start to forget there was ever a time when it wasn't there. Let me describe what this kind of suffering actually feels like, because most people have a hard time recognizing it until somebody names it for them. It feels like heaviness in the morning, a reluctance to start the day, because the day is going to bring another round of not doing the thing you know you should do. It feels like irritation at small inconveniences, because your emotional reserves are already being spent on the internal argument between the person you are and the person you meant to be. It feels like a strange envy when you see other people making progress, not because you resent them, but because their movement reminds you of your own stillness. And maybe worst of all, it feels like a slow wearing down of belief in yourself. Every time you tell yourself you're going to do something, and then you don't do it, a small crack shows up in your own self-trust. At first, the crack is barely visible. You can ignore it, tell yourself it doesn't matter, promise yourself tomorrow will be different. But the cracks pile up. Over the course of months and years, they add up to a fundamental question that starts to haunt a person. Can I actually be trusted to do the things I say I'll do? Once a person quietly starts answering that question with a no, something important inside them begins to die. I want you to understand that this isn't a small thing. It's not a mood that'll pass with a good weekend or a nice vacation. The emotional cost of wanting without doing is a compounding cost. It touches every corner of your life, whether you realize it or not. It affects how you speak to your spouse, because a person at war with themselves has less patience for others. It affects how you show up at your job, because you can't bring full energy to outside tasks when so much of your energy is being eaten up by internal conflict. It affects how you sleep at night, because the mind doesn't easily rest when it knows there's unfinished business between you and yourself. Here's something I want you to really sit with. The people who seem to have a lightness about them, the ones who move through life with a kind of ease other folks envy, are rarely people without problems. They're people who have closed the gap between what they know and what they do. They've ended the internal argument. They've stopped asking themselves to carry the double weight of knowing the right thing and not doing it. That closure, that alignment, produces a kind of energy that radiates outward and changes everything about how a person experiences their own life. You can feel it in them when you're around them. The good news, and I want to make sure you hear this clearly, is that the remedy for this suffering isn't complicated. It isn't found in therapy alone, though therapy has its place. It isn't found in a new philosophy or a new belief system or a weekend retreat up in the mountains. The remedy is found in the doing. It's found in the moment when you finally take the action you've been avoiding, even if the action is small, even if it's imperfect, even if it's late. Because the moment you act, the internal argument quiets down. The moment you begin, the weight starts to shift. You don't have to finish the work in a single day. You just have to stop refusing to start it. So if you're carrying this particular weight today, and I suspect a lot of you are, I want to offer you a simple invitation. Pick one thing, not 10 things, not a whole life overhaul, just one thing you've been wanting to do but not doing. And do it this week. Do it imperfectly. Do it slowly. Do it in a way nobody will even notice. But do it. I promise you, something will shift in how you feel about yourself. The argument will get quieter. The heaviness will start to lift. You'll discover that the cure for the suffering of wanting without doing has been available to you all along, waiting patiently in the territory of action you've been hesitating to step into. Okay, so we've talked about what discipline prevents, what it expresses, where it's forged, and what it costs when it's missing. But now I want to talk about where discipline is actually taking you, because I believe this is the part very few people grasp. Once you do grasp it, everything changes. The whole picture of discipline starts looking different, and your daily choices start carrying a weight you never realized they had before. Discipline isn't really about who you are today. I want you to let that sink in for a moment. Discipline isn't about fixing the current version of you, or punishing the current version of you, or even improving the current version of you in some immediate way. Discipline is about something a lot bigger and a lot more beautiful than that. It's about the relationship between who you are right now and who you're in the process of becoming. Every disciplined action you take today is a brick laid in the foundation of a future person, a person who doesn't fully exist yet, but who's being built in the quiet hours and the small choices of your daily life. I want you to try something with me. Picture a version of yourself, 10 years from now, who has become everything you hope to become. See this person clearly. See how they carry themselves, how they talk, the kind of work they do, the quality of their relationships, the peace they feel when they lie down at night. Really see this person. Now I want you to ask yourself a question. What does that person require of you today in order for them to exist at all? Here's a truth very few people understand. That future person isn't simply going to show up. They have to be built. And the only person who can build them is you, today, right now, with the choices you're making while nobody else is paying attention. This is why I believe discipline is best understood as an act of loyalty to your future self. Every morning you get up when you'd rather sleep, you're not doing it for the person you are. You're doing it for the person you're becoming. Every time you choose the harder right over the easier wrong, you're sending a message forward in time, a message that says, I'm willing to carry my weight so you can inherit what you need. That future person, when they finally arrive, will feel the truth of what you did. They'll feel the strength in their spine that was built in your unseen choices. They'll feel the steadiness in their character that was forged in your quiet mornings. Now, the opposite is also true. And I want to be honest about this because honesty is how we grow. If you're not building that future person, you're not just standing still. You're actively constructing a different future person, one who has inherited all the accumulated consequences of the choices you avoided. That version of you exists too, waiting in the possibilities of your life. They're shaped by every lowered standard, every broken promise to yourself, every moment you chose comfort over growth. One of these two future selves is going to show up. The question isn't whether you're building. The question is which of them you're building. This is why I believe every single day carries a kind of sacred weight, though most people never feel it. Every day is a vote. Every action you take or fail to take is a vote for the person you're becoming. You don't need to overhaul your whole life in a single afternoon. You don't need to become a different human being by the end of the week. You just need to cast your votes day after day in the direction of the person you genuinely want to become. Over time, those votes will tally into an identity. The identity will solidify into a life. The life will become a testament to the quiet, consistent choices nobody but you ever saw. There's something deeply hopeful in this way of seeing discipline, and I want you to carry that hope with you when you leave here today. No matter what your past has looked like, no matter how many votes you've cast in directions you now regret, the ballot is open again this morning. The future person you're building is still being built. They aren't finished. They aren't locked in. They're being shaped this very moment by what you do next. That is an extraordinary power, and it's a power very few people ever fully claim. Most people believe they're stuck with who they are. But who you are is just the current state of who you're becoming. And who you're becoming is still up to you. So I want to leave you with this. The bridge between the person you are today and the person you could be is built one deliberate choice at a time. There's no grand moment of transformation waiting around the corner. No single decision that'll make you into someone new. There's only today, and the choices you'll make in it, and the votes you'll cast with those choices. Build the person your future requires. Be loyal to them in your small hours. Honor them in your quiet mornings. Keep faith with them when nobody's watching. When the years have passed, and you meet that person in the mirror of your own life, you'll discover something that makes all the discipline worth it. You'll discover that the person you were becoming was always worth every single thing it took to become them.